have a record. And I'm pleased to welcome today Tina Evans of Colorado Mountain College. Sustainability studies educators in colleges and universities must identify and teach the knowledge, skills, and abilities their graduates will need most to advance sustainability while confronting perhaps the most serious, sweeping, and integrated set of challenges humanity has ever known. Drawing upon her recently published article, Competencies and Pedagogies for Sustainability Education, a roadmap for sustainability studies program development in colleges and universities, which was published in the journal Sustainability. Tina will articulate and describe a set of 5 competencies for the sustainability field, and she will suggest potentially effective pedagogies for teaching them. Findings from her article in the areas of both competencies and pedagogies for sustainability education imply the benefits of integrative, active, collaborative, and applied approaches to curriculum development and teaching, approaches that directly involve students in learning and practicing transdisciplinary engagement in service to sustainability. The Bachelor of Arts in Sustainability Studies program at Colorado Mountain College is Tina's home base. And sorry. She is the professor of sustainability studies at that institution, where she teaches in the Bachelor of Arts program in that field. She's also the author of Occupy Education, Living and Learning Sustainability, published in 2012. Tina has led and participated in extensive course and program development efforts in environmental and sustainability studies for more than 15 years. She focuses much of her teaching on sustainability theory and practice, sociocultural aspects of sustainability, sustainable economics, energy issues in society, permaculture design, and career development in sustainability. With that introduction, Tina, the floor is yours. You are the presenter. Again, I remind everyone, please use the chat box throughout Tina's remarks to post questions and comments. Please mute your lines. Please close your video screens and enjoy the presentation. Tina, please go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much, Ira, for that wonderful introduction and for the invitation to offer this webinar. I really appreciate all you and the SCC are doing for sustainability education. They're really important efforts. And I hope to see some of you who are at this webinar in Charleston, South Carolina, at the meeting that Ira told you about at the beginning, at the opening here. So just wanted to say hello, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's morning for me here in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and we've got a little bit of sun poking through now our very snowy day. So I'm looking forward to spending the next 45 minutes to an hour with you, offering some of my thoughts on competencies and pedagogies in sustainability education. And then to have some conversation after that point as well. So as Ira mentioned, please do enter your questions or comments into the chat box. He'll be curating those and then sending those forward to me after the presentation is over. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my webcam here just to show the full presentation. So you can see that on your screen. And as Ira mentioned, yes, please do mute your microphone and turn off your webcam. Thank you. All right, as Ira mentioned at the beginning, the title of my presentation is Competencies and Pedagogies for Sustainability Education. And yes, I am in Sustainability Studies at Colorado Mountain College. I do have, for your, in case you're interested later in following up on any of my other work or the work I'm going to be discussing today, on my opening page for this webinar, I have my Academia EDU site, my ResearchGate site, and my website, so that you could access publications from there. The article that Ira mentioned that this webinar is based on is open access from the journal Sustainability. So you should not have to pay to get hold of it. There are no blocks to accessing it online. So I encourage you to do so if you find our subjects interesting today that we're covering. Note on photographs included in here. The first one was me, you probably recognize that. But the rest of these are students, faculty, and staff participating in CMC's BA in Sustainability Studies courses and events, and I have little captions for those. So I hope you enjoy those too along the way as we discuss the content we're going to cover here. I wanted to start off with giving a kind of overview of sustainability. I'm sure those of you on this call, on this webinar, have a very clear idea what sustainability is, but it does take different definitions depending on who is offering them. This particular one here is the one that I typically use for a very broad audience. I find it to be pretty accessible and used it in our Sustainability Studies program review in 2014. The program review is for accreditation purposes. So I want to offer the folks reading that some background in what sustainability is, and I'll just read that very briefly. Sustainability entails promoting economic vitality, environmental health, and human well-being in ways that do not trade any one of these goals off for the others. All aspects of sustainability are pursued as a unity through integrative, optimizing approaches. Sustainability also emphasizes the importance of considering current actions within a framework that recognizes and values the long-term health and integrity of human societies and nature. So the study that I did of sustainability competencies and pedagogies had a couple of central purposes. And it grew out of my sabbatical research in fall 2018. I had a half academic year sabbatical from Colorado Mountain College to undertake this work. And it was recently published in October of 2019 in the journal Sustainability. And you'll see a link to that article specifically toward the end of the webinar here. So my purposes were to synthesize and describe in depth a framework for sustainability competencies that can serve as a foundation for academic programs in the field. And I had a lot of help in the sources that I accessed to do this. There has been some really great foundational work done in these areas, and what I did built upon that work and gave it a little different flavor in different areas, which I will be describing a bit later, but there's some significant work that I'll be citing in this webinar. Also, I was to develop a guiding pedagogical framework for effectively teaching these competencies. Most of my academic work has very much been directed toward program development in general. I helped develop an environmental studies program at another institution, and I was one of the people helping to develop this program here at Colorado Mountain College in sustainability studies as well. So my focus is often very practical in the research that I do, but I have a lot of interest in theory and applying theory to practice through the process of praxis. So that's kind of where I was coming from in this sabbatical as well. I wanted it to apply very much to our collective work here at CMC. I'm going to tell you just very briefly a little bit about our Sustainability Studies program so that you understand the context that I'm working in and for. The previous program that I helped develop in environmental studies is not unlike many other programs at other institutions in that courses that are disciplinary-based courses can be kind of put together in a basket. They may have an environmental focus or a social equity focus or a communicating science focus or something that is relevant to sustainability. And they can be placed together, and then using interdisciplinary courses as bookends or venues for students to integrate what they've learned in these discipline-based courses. This can be a very resource-efficient approach. That's one of the reasons the environmental studies program that I was part of went with this approach. It can minimize conflict among disciplines regarding enrollment. If you're getting your departmental funding from enrollment, often that's a source of friction among interdisciplines and disciplines at an institution and for new programs. This approach can entail missed opportunities for social and environmental relevance, however. I was not part of developing the initial course set here at Colorado Mountain College, but I was very happy to find that it was what it was when I arrived, and have been part of helping to refine and further develop that framework after arriving here, along with my colleagues. The approach at CMC is very interesting because our institution is traditionally a two-year college, and moving into offering bachelor's degrees, surprisingly enough, sustainability studies was one of the very first ones offered. So there was never any turf at the upper division when this program was launched, or competition for students at that level. So what was developed by the really forward-thinking faculty who worked on the initial proposal was a fully integrative and program, socially and environmentally relevant curriculum from the beginning that is not siloed in disciplines. And I think this is a major strength of our program and the source of much of its relevance to society. A few other quick things about the program. Our lower division general education program, of course, is part of it. This is very standardized in the state of Colorado. It's a very traditional, and it's standardized by law. It's a very traditional cafeteria style, discipline-based lower division set of courses. Our courses, Sustainability 101, Intro to Sustainability, and Sustainability 201, Issues in Sustainability, can be taken for elective credit within that framework, and we are working to get them counted in other areas that are significant to that standardized general education program. Our courses are focused at the upper division in sustainability studies, and we have 50 credits of core curriculum at the junior and senior level. And this will be as of fall 2020, because we're adding one course, and that'll bring it up to 50. We require upper division electives, 9 credits. They can be in business, they can be in sustainability, and they can be in a couple of other areas that we have bachelor's degrees in now as well. Our total credits are 120, and that is again a statewide standard. You have to get special dispensation to go beyond 120 credit hours for a bachelor's degree in Colorado. We also offer a Bachelor of Arts in Sustainability Studies with a business emphasis. It has the same curriculum, except that much of the elective credit at the lower division, some of it is taken up by business prerequisite courses, and all of the upper division electives are in business itself. Our curriculum website is linked here, so if you wanted to take a look at the curriculum for both of those programs, you could access it there. Our institution has many sites, 12 now, across the western slope of Colorado, which means the western side of the Rockies. And I'm at the Steamboat Springs campus, and there are 3 other sites. 2 of them are residential, including my campus, and 2 are commuter campuses. Okay, so moving on to the research that I did. Ira mentioned at the beginning wanting to move beyond some of the anecdotal kinds of publications that we've seen that are typical for, I think, an emerging early phase of a field, a new interdiscipline or transdiscipline like ours in sustainability studies. And those publications are very useful at the beginning. But I think myself and others who've gone before me and who are continuing this work in sustainability competencies and pedagogies are wanting to really be more systematic about what we are finding, grounding our work more in empirical studies, really taking a extensive and deep and detailed approach to ground what we're doing, so that we know a little bit more specifically what we should do and why we should do it and how we should do it. So a little bit on my outcome summary from this endeavor. I identified and synthesized competencies, knowledge, skills, and orientations abilities required for graduate success in the sustainability field. We definitely want to prepare our students to be effective actors in sustainability. I identified recommended pedagogies for teaching sustainability competencies and for use in our program, and potentially for similar programs like perhaps maybe yours. I developed proposals to apply these findings to the BAS, that's the Bachelor of Arts in Sustainability Studies, and by extension, potentially to efforts at other institutions. I'm going to go a little bit into my methodology and methods. If you have questions about that or you want to talk to me more about the details of it, it was pretty extensive and detailed what I did, but I'm going to do my best to give you an overview and kind of clarify how my conclusions are grounded in a lot of specific work and a pretty rigorous review. So I did this via literature review. I did a rigorous review of the recent international research and theory on sustainability field competencies. And then I applied to my work a modified grounded theory approach. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with grounded theory, it's modified because I didn't pose open-ended questions myself. People were not responding to questions that I asked them. Grounded theory poses open-ended questions and is wonderful for being able to understand ill-defined or complex phenomena, ideas, practices, situations. It's really great for that. It's an inductive approach where people respond verbally, either orally through interviews or in writing. And you do extensive analysis of what you see in those findings, what people have told you in response to these open-ended questions, and you try not to be very leading in those questions as well. So obviously the people who wrote these articles and books and reports and theses that I read did not respond to my questions. Nevertheless, I applied a very similar textual analysis process that's based in my past use of grounded theory to what I found in the literature. I emphasized resources for the past 10 years, although I pulled in a few others that were older than that, and went through 100+ academic and professional resources. Here are just a few examples. I mentioned there were 100. I tried to pull into this slide examples of different types of publications, including, say, the STARS Technical Manual from ASHE. It is not about competencies and pedagogies, but it is describing very well in some ways what a sustainability coordinator, sustainability practitioner would be doing. Some excellent work by Arnhem Week and his colleagues. Here they did some of the groundbreaking work on competencies, and there are many more resources that I drew upon here. Some of the anecdotal literature is part of this, and also reports like the one here cited from the International Society of Sustainability Professionals that did an empirical study really of what sustainability professionals are doing. So that was a very good set of descriptors that they offered in that publication. These are not full citations here. I thought that would just really clutter up the slide, but they are available to all these sources, and every source that I consulted, they're available in my article. So in pulling this information together and analyzing it, I used Excel to create a large matrix, basically, where I took notes noting the words that were used to describe competencies and pedagogies. I made kind of summative notes. I'll show you an example of a row in a moment from my little matrix, or not so little, it's got to be pretty large. And I ranked sources according to a framework that I developed that's listed, it's included as Appendix A in my article if you want to see the whole thing. And I'm going to show you parts of it here as well. So there were rankings involved in terms of sort of the reliability, the comprehensiveness, the detail of the source, and also really grouping things by similar ideas. One of the rankings I did was by methodology itself. So the articles, reports, books that I read, I ranked them in this tiered framework here with 5 as the highest. And I'm not going to read all of these to you. You can take a look at them, and I'm going to offer a few more comments on it. So this framework of ranking them by methodology was somewhat of a proxy for specificity, for empiricism in the methods, and trying to get at some of that detail of what sustainability practitioners are doing, and that we really know this, really trying to nail that down a little bit further. So that was one set of rankings that I did with all of these sources. I also classified them by subject, competencies or pedagogies. I had a few others that I didn't actually end up using a lot. I didn't have really enough material in some of these other areas. So I focused on competencies and pedagogies. Audiences also, I specified the audience that the material was aimed at, and that's important as part of a hermeneutical analysis of the text. So it's important to understand who it's aimed at in understanding its thrust and its applicability to different audiences as well. So the classifications above were used on the top of this slide. And then I did a relevance ranking for the specific audience that was that the article or book or whatever publication I was doing was aimed at. Going from general all the way to some extensive and specific coverage with strong applicability to the audience. So that's a tiered ranking there as well. So this is just a quick example of one of the sources that I could fit on this slide from my matrix. Some of the notes ended up being really pretty extensive if the author was dealing in some detail with competencies or pedagogies. You can see this is actually one row, but I've put it into 2 lines basically here to fit it on the slide. And the labels are at the top, the column labels, and you can see the source is at the left. I summarized the methodology for each. Sometimes they were quite a bit more detailed than this one. Did some listing of the competencies and skills, attitudes, orientations that were listed. Did a summative annotation of kind of what I got out of the article, what I thought its thrust was. Some other notes, maybe how this could be useful to us in our program development. And then you can see these rankings pieces with the kind of colored labels here. So we've got a subject classification, and you can see the ones that I didn't end up using, assessment and program development. But pedagogy and competencies are there, and I color coded them so it was easy for me to pick them out in the sheet. And then audience and application. So we had a bunch of different audiences: sustainability field itself, social change, people involved in social change more broadly, sustainability field education, so educators like us, and general education. And then the rankings within that, which I showed you on the last slide, 1 through 5. So you can see this one was sustainability field education ranked at number 4. And then the methodologies that I had rankings for, this one was ranked at number 3. So what I did with this material moving forward, I ended up with actually a lot more spreadsheets, taking the different competencies once I started to synthesize those and copying and pasting these references across different spreadsheets and starting to synthesize those and bring them together. And we're going to look at the outcome of that in a moment. Some of the outcomes highlights from the literature review. I had this large matrix that I developed, Excel-based matrix, and I developed and documented a rigorous textual analysis methodology for identifying core sustainability competencies, as well as credible pedagogical recommendations. And I created an annotated bibliography out of this. I did not include the annotations in my article, but I included the full bibliography. And the annotations are helpful for us here at CMC in moving our program forward. Okay, so more research outcomes highlights from the sustainability field competencies analysis. I developed a framework, competencies framework, that offers an important refinement of similar and recently developed frameworks, and that can serve a formative role in program development at CMC and potentially elsewhere. When I originally started this, I wasn't actually thinking about publishing it. I was thinking this was an internal project that I was doing for CMC, but it really revealed a lot to me. And I kept a very rigorous process going throughout, and really then developed the idea that I should share this with other people. So that's what led to the article. I have an analysis of the relationships between identified competencies and the BAS course and program outcomes, and I'll show you how I did that in a moment. Confirmation of our program is pretty well constructed at CMC, but I did identify some gaps and some desired changes and additions. And one of these led to the proposal and passing just this last year of a new course for sustainability studies here at CMC called Sustainability Assessment and Reporting. And I have some proposals that we're still thinking about for perhaps enhancing the lower division prerequisites, particularly in communication, as that is so important for our field. So these are the sustainability field core competencies that I synthesized. I'm going to let you read those, and I'm going to kind of go slowly here and offer a few comments on how this came together. So I mentioned that the original matrix with all 100+ sources in it, I started copying and pasting things out into grouping them according to similar types of competencies mentioned. And I started with a set that was very similar to this, but it had a couple of other things that ended up being subsumed into another category or described differently. And all of that is laid out in my article. And it was just a long process of really looking at the relationships among these identified competencies and synthesizing the best language to describe them. And these are not quotes taken from the literature. These are synthesized by me in doing that intense review of the literature. It was a very rewarding process. I really, I guess I would as the researcher, but I resonate with these particular 5 competencies. I think 5 is a good number. Week and colleagues had 5 and then 6. I think that's something that's handleable, that kind of number, in terms of doing assessment and really being able to communicate with colleagues in program development that it's not too large of a set. It's a nice number. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how my 5 competencies, there are very strong similarities with the framework developed by Week and his colleagues, and there are some differences as well. So I'm going to kind of go through these little statements, and the arrows, they point to the ones that they apply to, the competencies they apply to. So The interpersonal and communication competence. Effective communication figured in the literature as the most important, the most often mentioned skill set. And so I just wanted to explicitly say communication rather than only interpersonal, and to be able to pull some of those descriptions of types of communication into my framework a little bit more explicitly, which I'll show you in a bit. The creative and strategic competence. Employing strategic competency involves envisioning, planning, and scaffolding pathways to create something that does not yet exist. And I see this really as creativity at its core. And so I explicitly wanted to include this notion that this is a very creative field. We are building a pathway as we're walking it, right? So I wanted to include creativity there. Critical and normative competence. My findings included, including a review of my prior research and theory, explicitly include criticality as a basis for normative work. So the normative piece has been there in other frameworks, but I think criticality is the underlying piece that allows that to work. So I wanted to include the critical piece. The transdisciplinary competency. I think Week and colleagues had a overarching sustainability competency that allowed integration of the other pieces. And this just really kind of came from my prior work with transdisciplinary theory. And I just saw that as transdisciplinarity. I have a little document, if you're ever interested in looking at it, on Academia EDU. It's on purposes of different types of programs. And one of them is transdisciplinary. And so some of that, my early work was for that particular document that was part of some committee work at another institution. But you could take a look at that, and I just wanted to name this transdisciplinary competence. It includes application as well. So not only thorough integration, but application. Systems competence, this was one that was definitely included by Week and colleagues. It's at the center of much of what we do in sustainability. They also had anticipatory competence, and I was thinking about that and just really saw that as systems competence, including the future. So I just subsumed it. It seemed like a very similar skill set to me. And so I ended up with these 5. Each one of these competencies, and you can see this in the article that I published. You can download these images if you would like to work with them further. I liked preparing these as these large circle type diagrams here, because you can display something fairly complex on one screen or in one page in a handout, and it still has a lot of detail to it. And I think I've gotten really good reactions from my colleagues anyway in working with this, and being able to envision in a small space for conversation some of these competencies. So how I develop these, I have this kind of fuzzy line between 2 colors, and it's meant to be like that because skills, attitudes, and orientations and knowledge, there's not a sharp line among them. They're not in boxes. You know, skills and then knowledge is somewhere else. They do blend together, and some of these statements could actually be moved to another area if you were looking at it differently than I did. Also, the competence in the middle, it's meant to be by color, the blending of the 2 colors that are used in the larger diagram. So these statements in here, skills, knowledge, attitudes, orientations, these are synthesized from things that were stated in the literature review that I did. I did a lot of combining of things, and but I tried to state as true as possible to what was stated by an author, not changing things too much, but not using direct quotes really either. So pulling these together, I did one for each competence. I'm going to kind of flip to another one so you can see another one here, critical and normative. And you might be wondering what these numbers are for, because they don't correspond to anything that you would be familiar with. I actually did 2 sets of these diagrams. The first one did not have the numbers, and that is for generic use for anybody in any program who might be interested in looking at this framework. The numbers in here correspond to particular courses within our program at CMC. And so what I was doing in putting the numbers above each of these little statements, I took all of our courses, looked at all of the learning outcomes for them, and looked at where there was resonance, pretty strong resonance between a learning outcome as we had stated it, and a skill or attitude or orientation here, and put those course numbers associated with them. And I did this throughout. So you'll see that they appear in all of these diagrams in this webinar. The purpose of doing this kind of on the ground comparison with what we're doing was to see where the holes were. And you can see that SUS 450 is listed in these. It was not an existing course at the time that I did this, but I had the proposal prepared. And you can see that it fills in this particular competency area quite a number of gaps in terms of stakeholder engagement, actually moving projects forward, dealing with sustainability on the ground, which we weren't doing as much in our program. Covered quite a bit of the gaps that we found also in interpersonal and communication competence, and some in transdisciplinary as well. You can see particularly in the knowledge area, there are a bunch of 450s that are kind of alone over there. So that course will help fill a gap in our curriculum. We're really excited about it. I'm going to share the details about that in a moment. In fact, right now. So SUS 450, this is the course that I developed the proposal for. It's designed to develop interpersonal project management and sustainability assessment competencies for the field that were identified as central to the success of sustainability practitioners. And competencies for this course are important for graduate success and are not well developed in our program otherwise. The draft description at the time, this is actually a finalized description, covers interpersonal and strategic group and individual processes of conducting sustainability assessments using established frameworks and best practices. Assessments performed may serve businesses, nonprofits, educational institutions, government agencies, or other entities. Assessments performed utilize quantitative and qualitative methods to measure performance on sustainability indicators and to make recommendations for changes to policies, processes, and/or practices. Relevant policy frameworks are addressed through the assessment process. So we kept our description fairly generic. We didn't say we're going to use the Global Reporting Initiative, or we're going to use Actively Green, which is a certification one of our campuses has, or we're going to use HE STARS, because we may find that we change the framework that we use over time, and we don't want to have to change our course description every time we make a change of that sort. Our plan right now is to use HE STARS for this course and to compile as much data as we can and analyze it and work with stakeholders at our institution to do what we can within 3 years. We don't have anybody doing STARS right now, and we are new members to STARS. We are fairly certain that this will be a good educational process for the students. We're less sure about how well we're actually going to cover the total STARS framework. But I think it will be a good one for us to use, and then we will see where we might go in terms of institutional recommendations on STARS moving forward. Learning outcomes for this course, we have 9 of them. These specifically articulate with covering those gaps that I identified through the literature review and the diagrams that I showed you a bit before. You can see, I think, some communication between these outcomes as stated and those competencies. And I'm not going to read all of these to you. If you'd like to go back and take a look at them, you can look at them in my article, and you can look at them in the recording of this webinar. We also revised, and when I say we, I mean the faculty, the program faculty in sustainability studies, revised our program outcomes and artifacts that we are collecting for assessment. We have 5, and these assessment outcomes also have to articulate with the institutional outcomes, which I will show you in just a moment. But we have a final reflective essay that we have students doing, articulating a concept and practice of sustainability, analyzing, synthesizing, and interpreting complex adaptive systems. We see that coming from SUS 450, from the final project there. Conducting and communicating sustainability research, that comes from our capstone research project, in which they undertake original research, our students. Demonstrating how qualitative and quantitative measures can be used, and working with stakeholders to assess, report, and design approaches for sustainability, coming from SUS 450. And we have a careers and professional skills course as well, where students do resumes and portfolios, and we're going to be looking at this demonstration of professional and career development abilities there. So these are the other outcomes. So we have our own outcomes, but we have to articulate with the institutional outcomes, and then we wanted to articulate with the broader competencies that I identified in the field. These are the 8 institutional outcomes: critical and creative thinking, communication and expression, information literacy and research ethics, responsible application of learning, career, professional, and technical skills, recognition and support of diversity, collaboration and teamwork, and computation and quantitative reasoning. You can probably see they're really a pretty nice fit for what we're doing in our program. We actually do all of these things, and all 8 are blended into the 5 outcomes that we have for our program. An example rubric, just to tell you, I did develop rubrics for each of these artifacts as well. My work was geared toward not only identifying the competencies and the pedagogies, but assessment. We had a big a focused visit on assessment going on at the time that we did this, and it really benefited our program. I will not read this rubric to you. Know that the 4 column, if you take a look at just the 2 there, those are the highest implementation of this, articulating the concept of practice and practice of sustainability as it relates to the self, community, and the wider world. And then it goes downward there to 1. We can use these rubrics to look at each line, so an aspect, and we can use them to evaluate the entire artifact as well. Some conclusions on sustainability competencies. Sustainability is a transdisciplinary field that addresses complex issues and challenges by involving multiple disciplines and professions in dialogue and practice. It requires transdisciplinary competency. Its concepts and practices are based in studying, understanding, engaging with, and changing complex systems. It requires systems competency. Sustainability involves addressing interrelated issues and challenges through effectively communicating with and involving diverse stakeholders, people, and organizations. It requires interpersonal and communication competency. It is about changing the way people live in industrial societies through studying and critiquing assumptions and practices that drive unsustainable practices. It requires critical and normative competency. And sustainability moves beyond critique and understanding to create and implement strategies for personal, social, and organizational change. It requires creative and strategic competency. So our program outcomes and pedagogies need to prepare our graduates for effective participation in their field. And so my outcomes are potential contributions to program development. And that wraps up the competencies piece. The pedagogies piece will move a little quicker. I'm going to go through that piece as well. Hopefully you'll find that to be of interest too. So know that in what I describe here, my primary focus in locating sources for my literature review was competencies. I did do some searching on pedagogies independently as well, but I think I really had a stronger focus on competencies. And many of the competencies articles also mentioned pedagogies, so there was a nice overlap there. I developed a methodology for identifying the recommended pedagogies and weighing them according to their prevalence in terms of recommendations from people in the field, their relevance, and their credibility in terms of where the recommendation was coming from. Identification of pedagogical approaches to emphasize in the BAS also led toward this addition of SUS 450. As many of the pedagogies that you saw as the strongest in my study really mesh nicely with the process of that course. So my methodology was different for pedagogies. I first just took a look at how many references there were to pedagogies in the literature. And I came out with 172 from my list. And I categorized the references into 16 distinct pedagogical approaches that I synthesized from this purpose, for this purpose, and from my prior work as well. So I recommend just reading along the left-hand column here. This material is also included in my article, and the pedagogical approach is listed in the darker blue column on the left. You'll notice in this first slide that there are two that are on project or problem-based learning, one in class and one outside of class, and I end up kind of blending those. They're obviously a very similar type of approach, but they were mentioned distinctly in the literature. So here were some more of the pedagogies that I identified through this approach. A few more. So that was the total of the 16 pedagogies that I identified and developed some descriptions for. You may find, if you're working with folks on pedagogies, that some of those descriptions may be of use to you in thinking about how you want to approach teaching sustainability. When I was looking at prevalence in the literature, I counted a reference to a particular pedagogy from a source only once. So I didn't count, if they mentioned it 25 times, I didn't give it 25 ticks. I mentioned it just once. So this gave me more of an idea of how many voices we're talking about a particular pedagogy. So that's part of the 172 total there. I had an additional quality-based approach for categorizing pedagogical approaches as high, medium, or low priority. Excuse me. So I examined tiered subject rankings of specific sources advocating each pedagogy. So I was looking at the relevance piece for any particular source in terms of its audience. And I was also looking at the methodology used in the article. I had kind of, once I did this and applied these rankings, I had some natural breaks. And one of them was at about 65% of the references being derived from high ranking sources demonstrating high confidence with regard to the merit of the references mentioning the approach. And then there were a couple of others too. There was kind of a mid-tier and a lower tier. This is the rankings for the pedagogies. This is the framework that I use, with 5 being the highest. Extensive and overarching focus on pedagogy that includes specific examples, and going all the way down to generalized, minimal recommendations for pedagogy. Maybe they mentioned it, but they didn't really talk about it in any great detail. So the top tier pedagogies I listed here, you'll see that project problem-based learning in an organization community, and then also in the classroom. The second one is mentioned fewer times. The confidence in terms of the type of source and the relevance of the source to pedagogy were very similar. And I think this could kind of be combined into one project problem-based learning approach. Some mid-tier pedagogies were identified as well. And you'll notice that some of them came from great sources in terms of rankings, but they just weren't mentioned that many times. So this is kind of explains their ranking in the middle. And some additional pedagogies as well. Many of these last ones can be seen even as techniques that can be used within the other pedagogies. These pedagogies are not in boxes either. They overlap with each other. For example, experiential education. I use that as a category if it was the only way that the pedagogy was talked about in the article, with the full recognition that many of these other pedagogies are experiential education, but they are not maybe discussed by an author as that's the only way it's described. So that can kind of explain some of the labels here. So there are a wide variety of pedagogies being used successfully to teach in our field, and there are opportunities to highlight the ones identified through this research in our educational endeavors to hopefully improve them. And this figured into designing SES 450. My work is available through my article in Sustainability. The reference to that is on the right side of your screen. I was the guest editor for the issue that it's included in. And if you're interested in the other articles as well, I really encourage you to take a look at those. Some of them are still in process, but we're getting close to having it complete. Application of my work will continue in our program. We have a very collaborative, wonderful faculty here, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with them on these ideas and improving what we do. And I'd be really curious to hear if you end up using any of this framework. Shoot me an email, let me know. It would be exciting to hear if any of this is being applied other places. I'd like to acknowledge the sabbatical leave report from Colorado Mountain College and the support from my late husband, Dennis Lum, who assisted me with so much of my work over the years. With that, that's the last slide here. And I would love to hear any questions that you might have.
Tina, thank you so much for that excellent presentation. I know that I'll be going back to listen to the tape, to listen to it again, because it was so rich in detail. I did, FYI, post in the chat box the link to your article. It was posted in the original announcement, but I put it in the chat box as well. We have received a number of interesting questions, and what I'd like to do, Tina, is bundle the first three together and then move on to discuss another question that's been posed. So the first one for your consideration and comment is Peter Soika has asked if you could further define criticality in this context. He was a bit unclear what that meant in again, the sustainability in higher education context. Samira has asked whether the competencies that you've presented for university students would also be valid for high school students, younger adolescents. And Alba has asked, how would you transmit the competencies to students? So I'll stop there and let you take those in any order you wish.
Okay. Will you tell me the last one again, Ira, please?
How do you transmit the competencies to students?
Okay. Okay. Bear with me while I write some of these down, or I will forget. Criticality. I would say criticality is, I have a strong background in theory, and I did a lot of work in theory in my book, Occupy Education. And a lot of social theory provides us really good insights for recognizing things that are going on in our society and having names for them. For example, cultural hegemony, or looking at critical social theory, aspects of that, one-dimensional society, and so on. Give us some lenses for critiquing what we're seeing. Sustainability obviously needs to move out of and exists outside of the realm of simply saying, what is what ought to be. And we have to envision alternatives and different pathways. And some of the critique of what is really important. I know sometimes I hear from people, oh, we don't want to hear all the doom and gloom. Let's just move to the good stuff and what we're going to do about it. But I think that some of the criticality of understanding how we got into these fixes, from political and social systems, economic systems, and really seeing where the leverage points are, I guess, if you will, within a system for changing it, that critical aspect is really important. So I hope that helps on that one. Validity for younger students. I don't work with younger students much. I work with like 10 to 12-year-olds on permaculture, but most of my work has been for adults. And I would say that this framework is geared toward adults because it was geared toward my program. But I think those of you who have a sense of what is age appropriate for particular age groups could use this framework and adapt it in ways that you're introducing some concepts and processes to generate interest, generate involvement from younger people, and taking care not to load them up with things that are not appropriate, for their age. I can say with freshmen, and I've heard this numerous times coming into courses, and they sometimes are kind of mad. They say, well, why didn't we know about any of this stuff? How come nobody told us any of these things? And so I think there is a place for introducing some of that criticality and also, hands-on work and inspiration to do things with sustainability with younger students. And I think that would help them not feel like they've been left in the dark. So I hope that helps a little bit there. How to transmit the competencies to students. Basically, I guess I'm a little bit befuddled by the question because the transmission part sounds a little bit like you're passing it to them. And I think we have to involve them in discovery, in using the competencies, applying them, having their own voice in recognizing some of these competencies. And we also have to shape and guide that experience so that those moments of discovery and learning can happen, and provide them with material that they can reflect upon. Of course, excellent course materials really help. I do a lot of discussion-oriented stuff. We have a lot of writing-intensive things in our program that really call upon students to think deeply, and also hands-on. So we try to kind of bridge across multiple learning styles and give students many opportunities to grasp these. If you were kind of asking about how they might know more consciously about what they're doing with these competencies, I actually have not worked this framework into my classes yet, but I'm considering how to do that so that the students are aware. It's not like it's hidden in, in a closet what it is we're heading for, so that they are aware of what it is that we're trying to do and why. So that is a good question, and I hope that I addressed it.
All great responses, Tina. Thank you for those. I held another question, which we'll use as our wrap up question for last, from Megan Wagner. Well, I believe everyone can see that in the chat box for the recording. I will read it. How confident do you feel about the skills and competencies identified in the papers underpinning the Week et al. Article, his 2011 article, and others, but especially the Week article, which has set so much direction in this space? At one point, I had started reviewing the papers cited in the Week article, and at least some of them seemed to stop at making statements about what the needed competencies are. I don't know that these authors are wrong, but as someone coming from a field, geology, in which we just go out and measure things, I'm still getting comfortable with not being able to easily measure things. I worry that maybe the early work is simply being replicated and reinforced and possibly closing off new or alternate ideas. Can you please comment on this? And if you disagree with my assessment of some of the literature cited in Week, please say so and why.
No, I think that that's a great question. And, I had that kind of question in the back of my mind as well, which is why I did my own exploration, to use literature that's more recent. Obviously, when you write something in 2011, only the things up to that point can be considered. And, I did my work a few years later. There's more out there. And so I had the benefit of that additional literature being there. I am fairly confident in that with the modifications that I made to my framework. And that confidence comes from having empirically grounded professional sources that I rated high in developing the framework that I had, and it landed pretty close to the Week framework that's there. And just this multitude of sources from other places, different, geared toward different audiences, coming from practitioners, coming from educators. And there was a lot of convergence in what I saw. And as I said, I wasn't trying to, change a framework that was out there, just like, I want to change it and make it my own. I wasn't really geared toward that, but I didn't want to confirm it either without looking really carefully myself. So the depth of my analysis and the pretty close alignment with the Week framework, I think that they were really onto something there. And I think that it's something that we can continue to refine.
Great. Thank you, Tina, again for a wonderful presentation, and also thanks to the attendees, especially those who have stayed here till the end. In wrapping up, for those who were late and didn't hear my several announcements, please do keep an eye out for upcoming webinars in a joint SCC ASHE curriculum webinar series. That list should be out in early February. Please also look for the ASHE call for proposals, which includes an opportunity to join us, meaning SCC, at a joint ASHE curriculum colloquium the day before the ASHE conference in October in Milwaukee. And finally, as Tina reminded us, and Tina will be there herself, please do join us in Charleston, South Carolina on February 12th and 13th for the Sustainability Literacy Symposium. Information on that is on the SCC website. Going to the SCC website will take you directly to that information. With that, again, my thanks to all, especially Tina, for the great work that you've been doing on this topic. And until next time, signing off. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. So long.